Hi, welcome to, I suppose, what I consider to be a sub-series of musing on. And it's something I'm going to call Reasons and Resources. And invariably, it's always going to be about programming languages. And it is exactly what it says in the title. It's the reasons and resources for learning a specific programming language. So we're going to talk about Erlang in this episode. Now, the way I'm going to do these is it's very much trying to get you enthused in learning something new. I'm not going to necessarily present too many sort of hard learning facts, so you can go away at the end of this and say, oh, I know Erlang. That's not the point of these episodes. And sometime in the future, I'm probably going to get back into doing more tuitional style videos. But if you asked me what is my preferred way of learning myself, how I like to learn, I very much like to learn by using multiple resources and go from there. Sure, I often learn through watching a series of videos that are arranged under a course structure. Good example is the CS50 courses that Harvard offers through edX. It's a great example of that. But a lot of the time what I tend to do is, if I want to learn a new language, I go through 5 broad categories of things that I look at. The first is I have a look at the website, the main website. Then I look to see if there's any books on the subject that are available for free online. I then might also look to tutorials online, and then I'll go and see if maybe there is a free course in the language. And then finally I'll finish it off by looking for videos of presentations that are given at conferences around the languages, and then also podcasts, and then I'll sort of use a mixture of those things to work my way through over a period of time. If you were to ask me what is my primary way of learning things, it does, very old school, it does tend to still be books. I love buying a really good programming book and systematically working my way through it, and then augmenting that with maybe a video about certain concepts, going away and finding it. But the book is always my preferred method of learning, but it's not for everybody. We'll talk about certain key books for Erlang in a moment. But firstly, what I want to do is, what are some reasons for learning Erlang? I'll talk about my own reasons and motivations, but also get anybody watching this to sort of explore their own reasons for learning things. So my introduction to Erlang was really through the 7 Languages in 7 Weeks book, and it was actually the first time in the book where I really struggled. So much so that the series that I was doing, called, was it Learn to Code, Code to Learn, I actually had to stop it because within the confines of the way I was doing the videos, I couldn't find a good way to explain Erlang. And that was both troublesome and exciting, because it meant I had to go back and I was going to have to sort of learn it properly from the ground up, find maybe a different way of doing. Maybe I had to abandon the series. Who knows? Hopefully I'll return to it. But it was interesting motivator to get into a point where I don't know how I'm going to explain this. So that was my reason for then properly trying to engage in the language. But there's another, as I was going through, there was another series of sort of compelling reasons which made me sort of more attracted to learning it in a more systematic and a long-term way. And we'll go through some of these as I'm just using this Wikipedia article as a crutch for this, as a support. What I'll do is I'll include all the links for the tabs here that I've got open in the description, so you can just go through if you want to. So as I started to sort of peel away the layers, I did become very interested in some reasons around why you might want to learn a language like this. And a lot of it revolved around its fault tolerance, like how it dealt with faults, this let it crash coding style, and also stuff to do with hot swapping and high availability. So hot swapping is where you can swap out the code without actually stopping the system. And anybody who's ever had to work on a live system will know that's an interesting subject to explore in a language if you can see how that's done. So those were a few of the reasons to do with the traits of the language. The other thing is it's a functional language, so I've always been interested in learning languages where they really have the functional style sort of front and centre, and it very much does that. I think really from the get-go you're straight into that functional world. We'll look at a little bit of code in a moment, actually. So there was that. As I mentioned, there's the this sort of concurrent computation, where computations are executed concurrently during overlapping time periods instead of sequentially, and how that works within a virtual machine, which is what this thing called the beam, which is what Erlang runs in the same way that Java runs in the JVM, runs on the JVM. So that interested me, how they were handling processes and concurrency and stuff like that. Another thing about this, which I became aware of pretty soon from just studying the stuff in 7 languages in 7 weeks, is stuff that's really front and centre, which is the immutability of the language. So that's where, once you set a value or an object, it can't be modified after that point. You can only sort of store it in another object or do various recursion tricks. So there's no business of sort of x equals x plus 1. Once x has a value, you can't change it. So that's really interesting to see that done in a really rigid way. Also, the way pattern matching works and how that has a real major implication when you're doing things like equations. What does actually an equation mean in Erlang? And there's implications also with pattern matching and the immutability as well. And the other thing which I did mention before is the functional programming component is very much front and center, I find, in the language. So that's, again, same reason as before, something I wanted to dabble with in another language. And then you get these other sequential subset. So something called eager evaluation. So, that's when you're evaluating terms, you might find you come across things like eager evaluation, greedy evaluation. So that's where a function call is performed as soon as it's encountered in a procedure. And it's interesting in the language when you look at it, like how functions and helper functions are laid out. And if you've ever used something like one of the interesting things was, before I did Erlang, I revisited Prolog and Scala, and there were things in there that really helped me understand about the way stuff is evaluated in a block of code in different languages. So that's really interesting. And then you got things like single assignments and dynamic typing as well to consider. Now, another reason, and I didn't really realise this till after I started doing it, and this is very much tied to this hot swapping, is it's an interesting way to see a programming language where you can build an application out of these sort of hundreds of tiny little small processes. And obviously you can do that in other languages, but it was interesting to see that and really sort of almost like forced on you. So that was pretty cool. And another, on top of that, there's lots of reasons here I'm presenting, but it's interesting to see a programming language that has grown out of the telecommunications industry in terms of phone systems. I know there's a lot of languages out there that have grown out from various places, and a lot of those have origins in telecommunications. But it was interesting to see one from the phone industry where it was, specifically for things like use on switches, stuff like that. So it's interesting to often study languages where they're running might not be on a computer in the conventional sense, if you like. It might be on another computational system or another piece of hardware. So that's always cool, I think. Another reason for learning a language. So let's look at some resources now. So, but before we do that, one thing I want to do, let's show a bit of code actually. So we'll just go through this because there's some really good examples on the Wikipedia article where they've actually shown it with comments. And the other cool thing about this, and something I've discovered recently as I've delved deeper, is there's a whole documentation system in Erlang which allows you to process certain styles of comments as well. That's definitely something that's worth looking at. That was pretty cool to see that, how it turned your code into documentation with the correct use of certain types of comments. And if you ever look at a commented piece of Erlang, you'll often see, single percentage, double percentage, and triple percentage. So if you look at a module, whatever you want to call it in Erlang, you'll see this sort of layout. So you've got the name of the module, this module declaration, and it has to match the file name. You have the export statement, which contains a list of all those functions that form the module's public API. So that's basically then allows access directly to this particular function if you then need to call it from outside of the module. I'm not going to go into how you call it from outside the module, but that's the important thing. So you need export statements for anything that you want exposed so that it can be accessed externally to the module. Now, you might notice that there might be certain functions inside of the module which don't need to be accessed externally and only need to be accessed by other functions or other pieces of code. So they wouldn't necessarily be in the export section. Then we get this idea, because we're doing here a tail recursive algorithm. So there's certain things we need to do in the way we process the functions. So we can do recursion and we can do tail recursions. And to cope with certain scenarios, if you like. And so we've got this first bit where, okay, what happens if we receive a negative number? So if we receive a negative number, it's going to return this error neg value atom. And once you learn the language, you'll learn a bit more about what an atom is in the language and all the different sort of data types. But one point it does make, which is really good here, it says normally defensive coding is actually discouraged in Erlang, so let it crash philosophy, which if you study the language you'll find out exactly what that means. But of course we don't want things like infinite loops, so we need something in there that is going to deal with negative numbers that could result in an infinite loop in this particular module. if it's the integer 0, then it's going to return 0. And then for all other values, it then calls this private function, which is inside of here, but it's not exposed externally to perform the actual calculation. And then here's the sort of private bit. So if it receives 0 as its first argument, then we're done. So return the value in argument B. The second argument is donated underscore to disregard its value. So for all other argument combinations, considering everything that's been before, then we do this. So we decrement counter n, pass the third argument as the new second argument, pass the sum of the second and third arguments as the new third argument, and it's done using this here, this line of code. And if we omit it, you can see all of the code here. So we've got the module, the export, this thing which just catches negative values that are put in, and then some stuff here to deal with when it's 0, and then we've got the calling of the helper or the private function, and then again here if it's 0, and then all other combinations. I'm not going to go into recursion and how that works in memory at the moment, but I just wanted to show you a segment of code for the language, because I always find that, early on I just want to go, what does the programming language look like? So yeah, that gives you a pretty good representation of actually the sort of things to expect. And then we've got a few other things here like qsort. It's really nice how everything here actually has been commented here, so you can just walk through this and gain some understanding, even if you don't understand the language yet, of basically how it looks and how it works, if you've got a bit of an understanding of programming. So yeah, so resources finally. First stop, the main site, so the Erlang website. As I think it said in the article, Erlang is now free and open source. So yeah, knock yourself out. Loads of stuff on here. Now, in terms of books to go for, there's basically these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books I always see recommended again and again and again. So there's a book by Joe Armstrong. So he's one of the creators of the language. Sadly, he's no longer with us. But this is, it's a great book and part of the pragmatic programming imprint, and they do a whole load of interesting programming books. Then you've got Learn You Some Erlang for Great Good, which we'll come back to in a moment. Erlang Programming, a concurrent approach to software development. I've actually bought this book secondhand recently, so waiting for that to arrive. Whoops. Yeah, the good news with these books, if you like the paper copies, because they're a little bit older, they're fairly reasonable to find used online. And we've got Erlang and OTP in action, which is this one here. There you go. I haven't read that one. Haven't looked at it. This one, which is an O'Reilly one, which is introducing Erlang. I have taken a look at that book, and another O'Reilly book, Designing Scalability for with Erlang, which I haven't looked at yet. Now, the one I would recommend is Learn Some Erlang for Great Good, which looks like this. It's produced one of my favourite publishers, which is, I don't know if it says here, and I always get the name wrong. So I don't know if it's going to be down the bottom here. Oh, no starch. There we go. No starch press. Yeah, no starch press. I have a number of no starch press books. But the reason why I like it is because you don't even have to buy it if you don't want to. Learn You Some Erlang for Great Good is available free to read online. So everything is on this website, which I'll include a link to. And so that's one possible resource which you could use to learn the language, is work your way through the book, step by step. Another way, another resource that's useful is Tutorials Point has an Erlang Absolute Beginner's Guide. It goes through all the major things. Yeah. Yep, so why Erlang? So again, there's a nice neat set here of things, reasons for learning or reasons for using Erlang. So the application needs to handle a large number of concurrent activities. It should be easily distributed over a network of computers. There should be a facility to make application fault tolerant to both software and hardware errors. The application should be scalable. It should be easily upgradable and configurable. The application should be responsive to users within certain time frames. And then here you can see there's bits about how to install it. Yeah, very easy to install. I did my usual thing, and I think actually I've done a video on how I set up my system. But the usual thing of downloading the programming environment, and then programming language, and then basically just inside of Visual Studio Code downloading the appropriate Visual Studio Code extensions to do code highlighting for Erlang and stuff like that. So there's some basic syntax again. There's an example there of how you might write to the console. Yeah, so I find that this is quite a good format if you like to learn in sort of nice, succinct chunks for learning a language. Now another choice, and this is a bit more in-depth and requires a bit more time on your part, is this course on FutureLearn. Now unfortunately the course is no longer active, but all of the course content, including some stuff they did for a masterclass, has been put onto YouTube. So the University of Kent, must be Kent in the UK. I'm trying to think if I've ever visited that university. Probably not. I'm trying to think where I've done training before for the library service. Yeah. I don't think I went there necessarily. So it's more the technical colleges that I was involved with back when I was lecturing and doing training. So I don't think I've been to Kent. The only university I ever spent any time sort of in discussion with would be, was it Richmond? I'm trying to think of one in that area, but yeah, there's only been one at university in the UK where I've been in any discussions with in a sort of teaching capacity, and that was when we were trying to get a foundational degree off of the ground at Surrey College. But yeah, so I've not gone through all of this yet. Normally it's interesting because I had a look for sort of, all the material I'm going to show you is obviously free stuff, and I had a look on the various platforms for free stuff, and this was the first one that sort of hit my radar. The other ones I looked at that mentioned Erlang tended to take you down an Elixir rabbit hole. Elixir is another language that runs on the Beam. So yeah. But this is the one when I sort of researched into possible training courses that used videos to do as deliverable, this was the one that kept coming up. So that's a possibility for going through. Another thing I like to do, and I've watched a number of these multiple times, is various sort of conference and interview stuff around languages. So for Erlang, this is a really interesting one where they interviewed, did I call him Joe Armstrong? Hopefully I didn't call him Jim by mistake. Maybe I did. Yeah, Joe Armstrong. I tend to get a bit muddled up now with names sometimes. So yeah, it's Joe Armstrong. So if I said Jim instead already, I do apologise. So I think it's confusing because I knew a Jim Armstrong. That's the trouble. So that's probably why I did it. Yeah, so Joe Armstrong gets interviewed here. So this is what now, 11 years old. And it's a really interesting interview. It goes through all sorts of aspects of the language and all sorts of connected things. Really cool. Then there's this one, which was an evening at this Erlang factory with Joe Armstrong, Mike Williams and Robert Verding. This was done 9 years ago. So some other people that were involved with Erlang. And you can see the person interviewing them is Francesco Cesarini, how you pronounce that, which if the observant amongst you may have noticed that, he's the author of the book that I've currently got on order. So, interviews them. And then we have something called Erlang the Movie. So this is quite fun to watch. Any of the viewers here that find it amusing to watch old style train or informational videos that remind you a lot of 70s, 80s Open University programs. It's great watching this. It's really amusing. So yeah, someone says here, this should become a regular holiday classic. So yeah, fun to watch. Yeah. And a couple more resource suggestions before I wrap the video up. There is actually something called Beam Radio, which is a podcast available on all sorts of different platforms. And obviously from the title you can tell they're talking about programming languages that run on the Beam. And what I did there for you is I did a search for Erlang episodes, so anything that's got Erlang in the description or the title. And so there's a few here, 8 in total. So they're talking a little bit about Gleam, which is one of the newer languages on the Beam, and something I did a little video about recently, or well, probably 2 or 3 months ago now, actually thinking about it. And then specific ones about Erlang, RabbitMQ streams, more Erlang stuff, a little bit about Elixir. You'll find that Quinn Wilton has done an interesting presentation about the history of Erlang as well. So yeah, that goes right back to the early days of telecommunications and phone systems, actually. And so on and so forth. You can see various ones there. Also, very good podcast, just generally if you're involved in software engineering in any capacity or just curious. Software Engineering Radio. So I went on their website, did a search, and these are the ones that all come back when you do a search for Erlang. So there is actually one from March the 12th, 2008, which is a really interesting interview with Joe Armstrong. And so then we've got other various ones which have aspects of Erlang in them. And it might be a sort of, a brief mentioning in the process of talking about Elixir or talking about the Beam. But these are all of the episodes, if you like, that touch on Erlang in some way. You may have seen also probably I suppose the most well-known app that Erlang has been used for recently, beyond its initial use in the Ericsson telecommunication systems and on their phone switches, is for applications like WhatsApp. There, so yeah. So primarily, this is where it started out life, I suppose, in its support nodes, so various aspects of the networks that Ericsson are involved with. And then you've got things like RabbitMQ, some message broker software. And there's all sorts of interesting rabbit holes you can go down as well with these. But yeah, WhatsApp. Used to code WhatsApp. So you probably will find, if you go down an Erlang rabbit hole, you're going to find lots of references to messaging style systems. So that's another interesting little thing or reason to learn it if you're interested in message passing in programming and how that might be handled in different programming languages. Then yeah, definitely worth exploring Erlang and other related programs. The other thing I always like to look at these is influenced by, so Lisp, Plex, and if you go down the sort of history of Erlang, there's an interesting connection to Prolog in the early days as well, and it influenced some of these I know, some I don't. I've never been exposed to this language at all actually, but Clojure, Elixir I'm aware of, F#, I dabbled in Rust. You can see here by I don't know how easy the colours are, but you can see what rabbit holes I've been down. Scala, went down a Scala rabbit hole. Haven't looked at Dart really in any capacity, or Go. Don't even know what these are. Yeah, Opa, Oz and Ria. So that's another interesting little thing you can do as well is, find a language you really enjoy. Learn the language and learn the influencers and the influenced. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed this sort of first video of a new sub-series, and hopefully you'll watch a few more. I don't know what I'm going to plan on doing next. Well, actually, if you want, if there's a particular language you would like me to do a reasons and resources for, put a note in the comment section and I'll happily do one. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.